Jacqueline here from Jack Knits. There are two undisputable facts about knitting. One is that the most frustrating part of knitting is when you make a mistake and you have to rip out your stitches and ever so carefully try to get them back on your needle correctly without dropping any stitches. And two is that we all make mistakes. Even the most advanced knitters make mistakes all the time. It is inevitable. So what if I tell you there is one thing, one step you can do in your knitting which will get rid of all that grief and frustration? Well, there is, and I will show you exactly what that is. So unless your superpower is that you knit without ever making a mistake, then you must watch this video. It is a game changer. So I think we can all agree that it is very frustrating in knitting when you have made a mistake, you've dropped a stitch, you can't put it on your needle, or you determine that you've made a mistake several rows back, and now you have to rip out your stitches and try to put them back on the needle in the exact way that they should be. It can be very frustrating. Now with a normal stitch like stockinette or garter stitch, it's really not that bad. You can pretty much easily identify those stitches because they're pretty straightforward and get them back on your needle without too many issues. But as soon as you get into a more complicated knitting stitch, like let's say a complicated lace pattern where there's a lot of yarn overs or knit two togethers or passing stitches over, or specifically, especially with brioche knitting where you're doing brioche purls or brioche knits or knit one below, it is very difficult to get those stitches back on your needle in the exact fashion that they should be so that you can continue to knit without any issues. Now it is possible, and there's several YouTube videos out there showing you how to do it, but it's frustrating and the chances of success are kind of low, especially for a beginner knitter. So let me show you exactly what you can do to help you with that and prevent a lot of grief and frustration. And it's called a proactive lifeline. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's proactively putting in a lifeline in your knitting so that if you do make a mistake later on down the road, all you need to do is frog back to that lifeline and you can easily, without any issues, put those stitches back on the needle and you can continue to knit as if that mistake never happened. So let's show you exactly how to do that lifeline. So here I have knitted several rows of a 2-color brioche knitting pattern and I'm feeling really good about it so far. I've looked it over. I don't see any mistakes. I'm looking at the front and the back. Everything looks really good. So now is the time to put in a lifeline because I'm concerned that perhaps down the road I might make a mistake. I probably will. Most likely something will happen where I'm going to make a mistake later down the road. So let's put in this lifeline. So I am knitting with a worsted weight yarn here. So I am choosing to put my lifeline in with a lighter weight yarn and one that is very contrasting in color. So with this light color knitting I'm choosing a darker blue so that I can easily see the lifeline. And just cut a piece of yarn much longer than the length of your knitting and thread it onto a darning needle. And now I'm going to thread my darning needle exactly where my needle is going through the stitches. So just in that same direction, just pick up every stitch, put my darning needle right in where my stitches are on the needle. And make sure you catch every one. Try not to split the yarn either with your needle, but just thread it through. After a few, pull your yarn through, leave a nice little tail back here so it doesn't get lost, and continue to do that all the way to the end of the stitches on your needle. Okay, so now I am just finishing that up. I've got, now you can take it off your needle or your darning needle. Now I see that I've got my nice lifeline in here and now I'm feeling really confident that I can continue to go on my way. So now after you've got your lifeline in, continue to knit just straight, following your pattern as if that yarn there, your lifeline doesn't exist. Just ignore it. I'm going to continue with my pattern here. This calls for a brioche purl, and I am going to knit according to my pattern as if that lifeline doesn't exist. So I'm going to do this for a few more rows, and then I'm going to show you how to frog back to that lifeline and get those stitches back on the needle. Okay, so now I've knitted a few more rows of my brioche knitting, and I'm realizing that as I'm examining these nice stitches here in yellow, that something does not look right around here. See how these stitches lay nicely up to that stitch, and here, I don't know, something looks pretty wonky there. So I'm pretty sure I made a mistake there. I'm thinking I brioche purled instead of knitted in a couple stitches, and I don't know how to fix that. But I've got my lifeline in, so no problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take out my needle, remove the stitches, and this is always a frightening thing when you do this in knitting. You're like, oh, how am I going to get these stitches back on? But we're not going to worry about that because we have a lifeline. So now I'm just going to frog. This is what ripping out your knitting is called in knitting, called frogging. I'm going to rip all this out. Both colors here. And I'm just going to frog it out until I get to that lifeline, which is right here. Okay, so now you can see that I've got my lifeline exactly where my needle needs to go. I will not be able to frog it out any lower than this, so don't be afraid when you're frogging out that you're going to go too far, because this lifeline is preventing you from ripping it out any further. So you can see where that lifeline is exactly where my needle needs to go. So now all I need to do is, with my knitting needle, follow exactly where my blue thread is, and just put them back on the needle exactly where that stitch is. Here we go. Through there. I'm following, see how I'm following the path of that blue line? That means I need to go under this stitch, through here, through that stitch. I'm just following that blue line. It's my little lifeline. I need to go under there, through here, into there. Wherever that blue thread is, that's where I'm following with my needle. Okay, so now I should have my needle in exactly the same position where my lifeline was. So now I've basically fixed my mistake. I frogged back to where my knitting was. My needle is exactly where it needs to be. So now I can just continue to knit again like that mistake never happened. Now you can leave this lifeline in exactly where it is, because now you're in a great position to just continue knitting, and if you make another mistake, you can frog back to this lifeline. Now what if you are continuing to knit and you are so strong of a knitter that you don't make any mistakes for a few inches or for several rows, and you want to move your lifeline? Well, just simply very delicately, remove that lifeline. You can pull it through gently, but if you've got a really long thing, just take your darning needle and slip it out every few stitches and put it back in at the top row of your stitches again, and now you've got a new lifeline ready for your next mistake should it happen. So I hope you found this helpful. I would very strongly recommend that you do these lifelines for brioche knitting or any other type of fancy knitting. And I know you're thinking, wow, that seems like an extra step to do while you're knitting, but the alternative is you are ripping out way more than you need to. You can't put the stitches on and you end up giving up on your project or having to start all over. So the little bit of time that you spend with this lifeline is well worth it. Believe me, you will thank me later when you make a mistake and you've got this lifeline in place. So if you like this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up or subscribe to receive notifications of new videos every week, all about knitting tips and stitches and creative patterns. So thanks for watching and happy knitting.